This happened to me about a year ago. I was 26 at the time, living alone in a small house in a quiet suburb in New Jersey. I know some people dream about having their own place, but let me tell you, living alone can really mess with your head. I hated how quiet it got at night, so I'd always invite friends over when I could. My closest friends would sometimes crash on the couch just to escape their parents. That night, though, I didn't have any plans. It was a Tuesday, and I had work early the next day, so I figured I'd call it early and sleep at 10 p.m. I went through my usual routine, locked all the doors, double-checked the windows, made sure my car was parked right, and turned off the lights. Everything was quiet, but for some reason, as I was shutting the curtains in the living room, I got this strange feeling. You know, that prickling sensation like someone's watching you? I told myself it was nothing, shook it off, and went to bed. I woke up suddenly. You know those moments where your brain jolts you awake like it's trying to warn you about something? That was me. My heart was pounding in my chest, and when I grabbed my phone on the nightstand, it said 3:07 a.m. For a second, I thought maybe it was a nightmare. I was about to roll over and go back to sleep when my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a notification from my garage camera. Motion detected. I blinked at the screen, confused. I opened the app and the camera feed came up, but there was nothing there. Just the empty garage dimly lit by the streetlight outside. The notification said the motion happened 2 minutes ago. That's when I started feeling the dread in my chest. I sat up, listening. At first, there was silence. Then, clear as day, I heard the creak of a door hinge downstairs. I froze. My brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe I didn't close the garage door properly. But I knew I had. I always did. The hallway outside my room was pitch dark, and the hairs on my arms stood up as I cracked open my door. I stood there for a second, waiting for some kind of sound, a voice, anything. But all I heard was silence. I was about to turn back into my room and grab my phone again when I saw something. A faint glow of light coming from the living room downstairs. My heart dropped. Someone had turned on the lights. At that moment, I froze. My mind was racing, trying to come up with any explanation that made sense. Maybe I left a light on? Maybe the motion sensor was glitching? I kept repeating it in my head like it would make me believe it. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I stood there for what felt like forever, staring at the faint light coming from downstairs. Then, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate. Someone was moving through my house. Every part of me wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I knew I had to check. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe it was nothing. Grabbing my phone for light, I started down the stairs as quietly as I could, skipping the creaky step in the middle. When I reached the bottom, I turned the corner into the living room, and that's when I saw him. There was a man sitting at my kitchen table, just sitting there, like he belonged. He looked like he was in his 40s or 50s with long, greasy black hair and a scruffy beard. He wore a dirty, oversized jacket, and he had one of my jackets draped over his shoulders like he'd been rummaging through my closet. I must have made some kind of noise because he looked up at me, and when his eyes met mine, he smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was crooked and slow, like he was amused. He raised his hand and waved at me like we were old friends. Then he said, "Took you long enough." My blood ran cold. I didn't say a word. I didn't even breathe. I don't know how I moved so fast, but I turned around and bolted out the front door, leaving it wide open behind me. My only thought was to get out. I sprinted across my yard, barely remembering to grab my phone as I fumbled to call 911. I ran to my neighbor's house, banging on their door like my life depended on it. It felt like forever before someone opened up, an older couple in their pajamas. They looked at me like I was crazy, but when I gasped, "There's a man in my house, please call the cops," they let me inside. While I sat there on their couch shaking, the husband called 911. It was hard to process what had just happened. That man, sitting in my kitchen smiling at me. I kept replaying it in my head. It didn't take long for the police to show up. They told me to stay put while they went to check the house. I watched from the neighbor's living room window as their flashlights moved through my house. After what felt like an eternity, One of the officers came back out and knocked on the door. "He's gone," he said. "What do you mean gone?" I stammered. "He was just there, sitting in my kitchen." The officer shrugged. "We didn't find anyone. No signs of forced entry either. Are you sure you didn't imagine it?" That's when I got angry. Imagine it? My door was open. He was wearing my jacket. The officer sighed. Could have been a homeless guy looking for a place to stay. Happens sometimes. You're lucky he didn't try anything. I didn't feel lucky. The police left after a while, and my neighbors offered to let me crash on their couch. But I just wanted to go home. I wanted to convince myself it hadn't happened, that it was just some weird mistake. When I walked back into my house, I immediately noticed little things out of place. The kitchen chair was pulled out like he'd been sitting there for hours. One of my drawers was slightly open and my favorite jacket was gone. I didn't sleep that night. Every little sound made me jump. I kept thinking about that smile, about how calm he was sitting there, like he belonged. The cops didn't take me seriously, but I knew what I saw. The next day, I went out and bought a full security system. Cameras for the front and back, motion detectors, everything. I even changed the locks just in case. I thought that would help me sleep better, but it didn't. A few days passed and nothing happened. I started to think maybe the cops were right. Maybe it was just a drifter who happened to pick the wrong house. But then one night around 2 a.m., I got a notification on my phone. Motion detected. Backyard camera. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding as I opened the app. The live camera feed came up, and for a second I didn't see anything. But then, I did. There he was. The same man. Standing dead center in my backyard, staring directly at the camera. He wasn't moving. Just standing there. I sat frozen, watching him through the screen, hoping he would turn and leave. But he didn't. He just stood there staring. After what felt like forever, he slowly tilted his head to one side and smiled. And then he did something that made my blood turn to ice. He waved. It was the same wave he'd given me that night in the kitchen, like he was saying, "I'm still here." The camera feed cut out after that. When the police showed up, he was gone again. No footprints, no trace of him at all. It's been over a year, and I haven't seen him since. But every night when I lock my doors and check the cameras, I wonder if he's out there somewhere, waiting, watching. And sometimes, I swear I can still see him in the corner of my eye. I started working as a night shift leader at this small convenience store back in my 20s. It wasn't one of those big-name places like Walmart or anything, just a local store with maybe 7 or 8 other locations. Most nights, I'd have someone helping me out, but there were plenty of times I'd find myself alone for the entire shift. The store wasn't huge, so it wasn't exactly overwhelming to manage, even solo. Honestly, most nights were so slow I'd catch myself working slower just to stretch out the tasks. This night, it started like any other. I clocked in, grabbed my task list, and began unloading some boxes. Stocking shelves was second nature at this point, didn't take much thought. So my mind was wandering, probably thinking about the podcast I'd listen to later. I'd gotten through a couple of aisles when I heard this knock. It wasn't loud at first, just enough to pull me out of my thoughts. At first I thought I imagined it, but then it came again, louder this time, echoing through the quiet store. I walked down the aisle toward the front windows, where the sound came from, and there he was, a man in a hoodie, standing at the entrance. I froze for a second. He didn't look like a customer, especially not at this hour. I gestured through the glass. "We're closed, man. We don't open till 8 a.m. He didn't say anything, just stood there looking at me. It wasn't the kind of look you shrug off either. Something about it felt off. I pointed at the sign on the door and repeated myself. "Sorry, we're closed." After a few more seconds of him just staring, he finally turned and walked away. I watched him until he disappeared past the edge of the parking lot. Thing is, I didn't see a car or anything, he just left. Weird, right? I tried brushing it off, figuring he was maybe confused or at the wrong place. Shaking my head, I went back to stocking shelves. The rest of the night was quiet, for a while anyway. I was about halfway through my tasks when I decided to take a quick break. The store's little break room wasn't much, just a small table and a mini fridge, but it was my sanctuary during these long shifts. I sat down, pulled out my sandwich, and scrolled on my phone while I ate. Probably spent a good 30 minutes there, just relaxing. But when I stood up to get back to work, I heard something that made my stomach drop. Footsteps. At first I thought maybe I was imagining it. The building made noises sometimes, the air conditioning kicking on or the cooler humming to life. But this was different. Steady, purposeful. Footsteps. I froze, listening. The sound was faint, but definitely coming from the front of the store. My first thought was that maybe the guy from earlier came back. But how? The doors were locked. I grabbed my phone and crept out of the break room, keeping to the shadows of the aisles. Peeking around the corner, I scanned the store but didn't see anything at first. Then I noticed it. A pack of chips lay open on the floor, like it had been knocked off the shelf. My heart started pounding. That hadn't been there before. I glanced toward the entrance, and that's when I saw it. The side door, one we never used, was cracked open. I swear, my blood turned to ice. That door should have been locked. I had locked it. I moved slowly, careful not to make any noise. Whoever was in here had to still be nearby. I ducked low, peering around the shelves, and then I heard them again. Footsteps. This time, they were heavier, closer. I held my breath, trying to figure out where they were coming from. Then I saw him. The guy in the hoodie. He was walking down the far aisle, just strolling like he owned the place. Panic hit me like a truck. I ducked back behind a shelf and tried to think. My phone. I could call the cops. But when I unlocked it, there was no signal. Damn it, I whispered, my hands shaking. The footsteps got louder, heading toward the break room. I figured if he went inside, I could make a run for the front door. But just as I was about to move, I heard him stop. Then without warning, the footsteps turned, coming back toward me. I bolted. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I sprinted down the nearest aisle, knocking over a stack of cereal boxes to slow him down. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice harsh and sharp. I didn't look back. I ran toward the front, fumbling for my keys. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold on to them. By the time I got to the front door, I could hear him running after me. The sound of his boots pounding against the floor echoed through the store. Come on," I muttered, jamming the key into the lock. I glanced over my shoulder just in time to see him turn the corner. He had something in his hand, a crowbar or some kind of tool. The door finally clicked open, and I threw myself outside, slamming it shut behind me. My heart was racing, and my legs felt like jelly, but I didn't stop. I ran around the side of the building, heading for the parking lot. That's when I heard it. A loud, sharp crack that echoed through the night. A gunshot. I hit the ground instinctively, my hands over my head. My ears were ringing and my chest felt like it was going to explode from how fast my heart was beating. Peeking around the corner, I saw the guy standing in the doorway, his arm outstretched, the gun aimed in my direction. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I crawled toward my car, staying low and out of sight. By some miracle, I made it to the back seat and shut the door as quietly as I could. Fumbling with my phone, I finally got a signal and dialed 911. My voice was shaking as I explained what happened. "He's got a gun," I whispered. "He's still inside the store." The dispatcher stayed on the line with me, but I didn't dare move. I could still see the guy pacing inside through the windows, his silhouette moving back and forth. The cops showed up in what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Their lights lit up the parking lot, and I finally felt a sliver of relief. The man was gone by the time they got inside, but they found signs of a break-in at the side door and a bullet hole in the front window. The scariest part? They found a message scrawled in marker on the break room wall. "You're not alone." I quit the job the next day. Even now, years later, I still get chills every time I hear footsteps in an empty room. Hey guys, I've got a story to share that still haunts me to this day. If you're watching this alone at night, you might want to check your locks first. This isn't some ghost story. This is real, and it happened to me. It was a Thursday night. My roommate Ryan was out of town visiting family for the week, which meant I had the place all to myself. I loved Ryan, but the guy was messy and loud, so a week of peace sounded perfect. That night the air was cool, and our little suburban neighborhood in Portland was dead quiet. No kids playing, no dogs barking, just that calm, peaceful silence. I grabbed a couple of beers, put on my hoodie, and decided to relax on the back porch. The porch was small, but it had a great view of the alley behind the house. I sat in my creaky old lawn chair, scrolled through my phone, and enjoyed the quiet. About 20 minutes later, I noticed something. You know that feeling when someone's watching you? I looked up, and at the far end of the alley there was a figure. He was tall, like really tall, and wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up. At first I thought it was a neighbor taking a shortcut or some random guy passing through. But something felt off. The way he was standing, too still, just standing there, halfway in the shadows, facing my direction. I looked down at my phone, trying not to overthink it. When I glanced back up, the guy was closer. I don't mean he walked up. It was like he teleported halfway down the alley. I sat up straight, my heart starting to pound. "Hey man, you need something?" I called out. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching me. Something about the way his shoulders slouched and his head tilted gave me chills. That's when he started walking, straight toward the backyard fence. I bolted inside, locking the back door behind me. My heart was hammering in my chest. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, maybe he was just drunk or lost, but I still checked every lock in the house. I peeked through the living room blinds, and my stomach dropped. He was standing in the backyard now, right by the fence, staring at the house. His hoodie shadowed his face, but I could feel his eyes on me. I grabbed my phone and called 911. While I was on the line, I heard it, the sound of metal scraping. I ran to the garage door, and sure enough, he was trying to force it open. I could see the door trembling under his weight. 911, there's a guy trying to break into my house. Please send someone now. The operator told me to stay calm and lock myself in a room. I sprinted to the small office downstairs, the only room without windows, and locked the door. From inside, I could hear the garage door give way with a sickening metallic crash. He was inside. The footsteps that followed were slow and heavy. They thudded against the wooden floor, each step echoing in the silence. He was looking for me. I covered my mouth, trying not to breathe too loud. The footsteps came closer and closer, until they stopped, right outside the office door. I saw the shadow of his feet under the gap. He stood there for what felt like forever. The door handle turned. I nearly cried out, but it didn't open. It was locked. Then, he did something I'll never forget. He leaned close to the door and whispered something. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear his voice, a raspy, low mumble, like he was talking to himself. And then, just as suddenly as he came, the footsteps faded away. I stayed in that room, barely breathing, until I heard the faint sound of sirens. The cops showed up minutes later, but it felt like hours. I didn't leave the office until I heard them calling for me. When I opened the door and ran out, my legs felt like jelly. They found the guy in the garage, crouched behind my roommate's car, holding a crowbar. The thing is, he didn't fight or try to run. He just sat there mumbling to himself like he didn't even know where he was. The police searched him and found a backpack with duct tape, a rope, and a knife. When they questioned him, all he said was, "I wanted to see who was home." That's it. No explanation. No motive. Later, one of the officers pulled me aside and told me the guy had been seen in the area before. Apparently, he'd been breaking into houses, but no one had caught him until that night. I didn't sleep for days after that. I installed cameras, double-locked every door, and even bought a dog. But the worst part? Sometimes, late at night, when everything's quiet, I swear I hear footsteps outside the house. I haven't seen him again, but I'll tell you this. If you ever feel like someone's watching you, don't ignore it. If you've got stories like this or think this was insane, drop a comment below. And seriously, stay safe out there. Lock your doors and trust your instincts. I'm lucky I'm even here to tell you this. I work at a 24-hour bakery in a quiet town in the middle of nowhere. It's not exactly glamorous, but it pays the bills while I try to figure out my life. Most nights, it's me and another worker splitting the load, but tonight was different. My co-worker called in sick, and when I tried reaching out to others to cover the shift, no one answered. So yeah, it was just me, Megan, alone for the night. At first I thought, no big deal. It's usually dead around here after midnight. The occasional trucker or someone desperate for a sugar fix comes by, but I could handle it. Plus, it gave me time to sketch in my little notebook, my only escape from the monotony. By 12:30, I'd wiped down the counters and restocked the display case. Everything was so quiet. Too quiet. Even the usual hum of the fridge felt distant. That's when I noticed one of the seats in the dining area was pulled back slightly, like someone had been sitting there. I stared at it for a moment, trying to remember if I'd forgotten to push it in earlier. Probably just me being paranoid. About an hour later, as I was sweeping the floor, I saw him. A guy, standing outside the bakery, just staring. He was tall, wearing a long coat with the hood up, so I couldn't see much of his face. The fog made it worse. It clung to him like he was part of it. I froze. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't come closer. He just stood there, watching. I tried to shake it off and keep sweeping. Maybe he was just a weirdo waiting for a ride or something, but when I glanced back, he was gone. I went back to work, trying to focus on cleaning. The broom was my best friend at that point. But that peace didn't last long. The lights flickered. Just once, but long enough to make me pause. Great, I muttered. That's all I need, a power outage. Then I heard it. Footsteps, not outside, but above me. Slow, deliberate steps creaked across the ceiling. My stomach dropped. No one was supposed to be up there. The only thing above the bakery was a tiny office and the access to the roof. I grabbed my phone and checked the cameras. That's when I saw him, the guy from outside. But now he was inside the kitchen. I didn't even hear him come in. He wasn't doing anything, just standing near the freezer, staring at the camera like he knew I was watching. I slammed my phone down and backed away. That's when I noticed something scribbled on the notebook I'd left by the counter. 3 words. You're not alone. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to think. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, just in case. The guy didn't look like he had a weapon, but I wasn't taking chances. I peeked around the corner and he was gone. Just gone. I bolted to the office, hoping to lock myself in, but before I could, the lights cut out completely. Pitch black. My breathing was the only sound I could hear. That's when the footsteps started again, closer this time, right outside the office door. "Megan!" a voice rasped. My heart stopped. He knew my name. I pushed against the door, holding it shut with everything I had. The footsteps stopped, and I heard something heavy being dragged across the floor. The freezer door creaked open. I didn't stick around to find out what he was doing. I grabbed the office keys and sprinted for the front door, unlocking it as fast as I could. I stumbled into the parking lot and locked myself in my car, shaking and trying to call 911. When the cops arrived, they searched the place. Nothing was taken. No signs of forced entry. They checked the cameras, but here's the kicker, there was no footage of him. Just me running around like a maniac. They didn't believe me, but I know what I saw, and sometimes late at night I think I hear footsteps outside my apartment window. He's still out there, watching, waiting.